I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. We're going to start tonight with a deep dive into the state of Oregon economics. It is going to be a blast for those of you who love numbers, and it's going to include words like liabilities and revenue models and assumptions. Big night for you accountants. It also might be a shock for those of you who love getting the kicker tax rebate because, well, let's just say things are changing and the rebate may become a thing of the past. And that is our big story tonight. If you've lived in Oregon for a while, you know what the kicker is, but just in case, it happens when the state's economic forecasting gurus estimate how many tax dollars are going to flow into the state coffers over a 2-year period. If the actual amount is 2% above that estimate, then the extra money is all sent back to taxpayers in the form of a tax credit. The theory is the state wasn't counting on that money anyway, so let's give it back to the people. And that has happened a bunch of times. In fact, every time since 2013. Most recently, we saw the largest kicker ever. It was $5.6 billion total paid back to taxpayers. And the kicker for the current biennium, which runs through the end of June of next year, is expected to be $1.79 billion. So, over the last 10 years, that is a ton of money. The state sending that money back to taxpayers because the forecast was too low. And this graph shows just how wrong over the last 8 years it's been. It's the bars there on the right. Since 2009, they've been wrong on average by 6.3%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but actually it is. Now, every once in a while, one of you is going to email me saying, hey, Oregon should get rid of the kicker and the state should hang on and use that money for important programs, roads, schools, you name it. But the kicker is extremely popular. And the politicians know it's basically political suicide to try and eliminate it. So instead, the state's economists now are tinkering with the formula that leads to the forecast. And they're betting it's going to mean the state holds on to a lot more of that tax money instead of sending it to you and me. Over the last year, Oregon state economist who was with the state for 14 years left his job, as did his deputy. There's a new state economist, a longtime Wall Street analyst. And he's changing the way the revenue forecast is done.
Now, what the chart you've seen in the press release shows a forecast error over the last couple of biennia, and so my mandate joining DAS back in September was to really get to the bottom of what's happening here. And so, what my team has done is kind of deconstruct and reconstruct a lot of the forecast models to figure out, what was happening. And we kind of came to two conclusions that were contributing to those forecast misses over the last couple of biennia. And the two conclusions were, one, part of this was exactly what we've just been discussing for the last 10 minutes or so, which is a forecast for the economy that was too pessimistic, and then making adjustments to that in our modeling of the economic outlook. And the second was the kind of the treatment of kickers within the modeling of revenue flows.
Okay, so basically for the last decade or so, the economic models were leaving the kicker refund out of the formulas used to predict how much tax money would come in. And that made the forecast artificially low because they weren't really looking at the whole picture. And those formulas caused the lowball projections to sort of snowball over time, which was explained by Michael Kennedy, a senior economist who also works with these forecasts.
So in 2011, the legislature passed a law that said instead of getting checks in the mail like you got prior, it became a credit on your tax return. The office had to make a choice whether to make the liability in the model post-kicker, like the real liability, or to model that impact outside the model. And the reason why we chose to make it outside the model was because the kicker is very distortionary. The model would want to, if you had a $5.6 billion reduction in liability, the model would want to reduce withholding, it'd want to reduce estimated payments, it'd want to reduce all those different types of collections across the board unless you used a lot of elbow grease. Outside the model, you could just say, oh no, it's, people are going to pay less payments at tax time and they're going to get a lot bigger refunds. And you can make those adjustments very easily And that was really the decision that was made. What you end up with over time, though, when you get large kickers, is you've got a model that's basically a world where the kicker doesn't exist, and you've got collections coming in that are a lot lower, and you just have the potential there where you're vacillating back and forth. You can easily start to make errors in terms of what you're estimating the real liability to be. And that's what we've seen is if you look back as the kicker gets bigger and that difference gets bigger, the errors get bigger. And you can get this recursive effect where the errors are just going to get bigger and bigger as the kicker gets bigger, unless you go back to a world where liability in the model is really the real liability and you don't have this difference.
So the tinkering with the forecast formula is now including the kicker numbers to project future revenue instead of leaving them out. The new state economist went on to great lengths to make sure that you know he's not blaming the past folks who did the forecast. And he stressed to me just 3 hours ago when we talked that he is not taking the kicker away from anyone. He's simply making the forecast more accurate. So if you love the kicker, relax and know that we are on track to get one in 2026. Right now, it's a total of $1.8 billion. And if you think they're ridiculous, relax and know that we're probably not going to see one again for quite a while. I also had a chance to ask Governor Tina Kotek about the change today.
I think the conversation this morning about the forecast, and I haven't seen this morning's presentation, but I'm aware. I think the truing up of the calculation under the new chief economist is really going to be helpful to provide stability when we are trying to do budgeting every 2 years. And I think his assumptions around the recalculations made a lot of sense to me.
Now, these models matter for a lot more than just the kicker refund. State lawmakers use the projections to have a better idea of how much money they have available to spend. So it's especially important ahead of the long session that's going to begin in January. And the new models are already impacting the state budget and what lawmakers will have to work with. The forecast now shows an increase of $945 million above what lawmakers thought they would have. If your head's spinning from all the numbers, let's just boil down what we've learned now. The new state economist is changing the way the state projects revenues. The current kicker that sits at $1.8 billion will not be affected much. That's the one that you'll see in early 2026 when filing your taxes for the year before. But for bienniums after that, don't expect the kicker, because the economists' hope is that their new models are far more accurate in its projections than they've been over the past decade. How about that? Coming up next on The Story, I sit down with Portland's interim city administrator, Michael Jordan. We'll talk about the uncertain future of the city's budget and how it could mean layoffs are on the way. Plus, we'll talk about how much money the city's spending every year on the homeless crisis. And if you have a guess, go ahead and guess higher. That's next when The Story returns. Now let's get to part one of a conversation I recently had with one of my favorite people from the city of Portland, Interim Administrator Michael Jordan. He has a unique mix of extensive government work in leadership positions and an insider's look at how the machine that is the city of Portland really works. And he's one of the main folks on the inside now trying to make it better. The big takeaway tonight, the city budget is in big trouble. In part because we're spending more than $100 million a year on homeless programs that we did not pay for 4 years ago. And also, all those vacancies in the downtown office towers, those are torpedoing the value and drastically lowering the amount of taxes that they pay to the city. So that's bad news for the budget. And that also leads to the possibility of layoffs in the city government. Things are going to be tighter. You're looking at right sizing. So does one organization have too many of this person or too little of that person? Do you see any sort of layoffs coming?
Well, I would hope that would be a last resort for us, but I think we may actually see layoffs this cycle. We'll look at, materials and services budgets. We'll look at, can we do business more efficiently in other ways? Vacancies, we have a significant number at any given moment, somewhere between 5 and 6% of our 7,000 positions are vacant, and for different reasons in different bureaus, obviously. But when we have to constrain the workforce, the first look we'll look at are vacant positions.
Can we just live without those for a year?
How long
or
have
two?
they been vacant? Why are they vacant? And you can't eliminate all those. You have to replace some of those folks. But that's the first place we'll look when it comes to people, before we actually have to move to laying off folks.
Do you remember the last time there was a layoff, or I can look it up? Because I don't really remember in my 34 years here.
The mayor asked for 5% cut budgets last year.
But don't they always do that?
No, they don't always do that. Last year was the first time in my 9 years that we had a cut budget as guidance to build a budget with cuts. And I don't know exactly, I'd have to go back and look, but I would not be surprised if there were some layoffs last year. Not many, but some. There may be more this year. And this constraint is going to go on for, I would say, a few years. And I should explain a little bit, because the constraint is different in different parts of the organization. But there's almost nowhere I can look from the chair I sit in and not see a budget that's got problems.
All right, and that is a big deal, because the chair that Michael Jordan is sitting in as city administrator, he can pretty much see everything. Now, he's going to explain where the problems are. Let's start with the general fund, which is sort of like one of the main checkbooks that the city uses to pay for things.
The general fund has two problems. One, we are running a number of very expensive programs that didn't even exist 4 years ago. The shelters, 1,000 shelter beds that have to be run around the city, all of the street coordination that goes on, the people that go out and meet with homeless people and navigation. We're paying for an office that does that. The incident reduction program, which are the ones that clean up camps, clean up litter, take care of all those issues. We're spending, I would say, well north of $100 million on that didn't exist 5 years ago in the general fund.
But wait, there's more. Half the money that comes to the city is from property taxes. And that's where the downtown vacancies are a real problem. The property values are down so much that they're reducing the overall percentage of new tax money flowing into the city.
On the revenue side of the equation, I'll just talk about property taxes. Number one source of revenue for all cities in Oregon, not just Portland. It's about 50% of our revenue, our general fund revenue, comes from property taxes. Normally, with the constitution that we have around property taxes that are limited, but property taxes are allowed to grow about 3% per year. And then if there is new construction, you can add to that a little bit. So our property tax revenue has grown from 3 to 5% per year, depending on the amount of new growth, new development. This year, we're anticipating that property taxes will grow less than 1%.
Wow.
That is primarily because of the shrinking value of downtown property. So it is now gone below assessed value. Real market value has now gone below assessed value and is now actually constraining the amount of property taxes that are collected on downtown, to the point that our total property tax has now dropped below 1%.
Wow. So a big office building that used to be, for example, 100 million is now the real market value is maybe 60 or 70 million, even though it's assessed at above that.
Well, assessed value is what gets taxed under the new system. And for the most part, assessed value is well below real market value for most property in the city. But downtown, because of vacancy rates, those big buildings are assessed on the amount of income they make.
Oh.
And because not only are they 30% vacant, but the leases that are come up for renewal are being renewed at much lower rates. Even if they're getting renewed at lower rates. And so the income off that property has dropped dramatically. And that's how they get taxed. And so they've dropped, actually used to be real market value was like double assessed value. Now the real market has dropped below assessed.
Wow.
And so that's a drain on the amount of new property tax money from the rest of the city.
And that's a big part of why things look so grim. So instead of getting 3 to 5% increase in property tax money, which makes up half the budget, the city of Portland is expecting more like 1%. Which led me to wonder why the city budget has to cover something that arguably the county should be doing when it comes to all those homeless programs. Why can't the city just stop paying that $100 million and just give all that work to the county?
Wow, there's a good question. I think the reason we're in the sheltering business at all, which is the biggest part of that amount, is because the county was not in that business. And I think Mayor Wheeler, a few years back, just decided we're not going to be able to get the county to do this, and we believe this can be a good way to approach the homeless problem. And so we just started doing it. And it has grown, and to be fair, in 2020 and 2021, we got quite a bit of federal money through the ARPA program, but that was one-time money. And so we actually built that program with one-time, much of it, not all, but much of it one-time federal money. And to, I think, Mayor Wheeler's great credit, because he couldn't even get anybody to stand next to him at a podium when he announced this program 4 years ago. Now, the county is helping to pay for some of that program, and through the intergovernmental agreement that you've heard a lot about lately, that we are still in. That agreement really transitions those shelters to the county, and they will pay for them in the future. Now, how quickly that transition can occur, we have a 3-year agreement with them. We're hopeful that that transition occurs next year. But I also know that that's a really complicated transition. So we're hoping, that we'll get some relief there. There are challenges with the money that the county gets from the metro income tax, and that is also perhaps in flux. Metro is looking at potentially going back to voters with a restructured
Maybe increase
tax
the income where you get hit with it?
that might increase the income, might lower the rate of the payment, might also carve off some of that money to go to actually building affordable housing. Right now, it's restricted to only services that support the houseless effort. So if the amount is constrained by changing the way the tax is collected, and you carve off a fairly substantial amount to actually build housing, that leaves a constrained amount to pay for services like sheltering.
Yeah.
And so it's a challenging environment and really complicated, and I don't want to overcomplicate it, but I think it all adds up to a pretty challenging time for the next few years.
Okay, so we've learned so far that the city budget will be very tight this next year and might actually force layoffs. Part of the problem is lower values for office buildings downtown because they have so many empty offices and empty floors. That means less tax money for the city. We've also learned the city is paying $100 million a year for homeless services, further straining an already strained budget. Tomorrow, we'll feature part 2 of my conversation with Mr. Jordan, taking a closer look at the inner workings of the city of Portland and how things are going when it comes to the government's transition that's been happening behind the scenes. It all becomes official in January. But in the meantime, what's going through your mind? After hearing what Jordan had to say tonight, we covered a lot of ground, but I think it's important to have this inside look at our state's largest city government, one that we rarely get to see. Share your thoughts with us, will ya? You could send us an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. We love hearing from you. In the meantime, stay with us. We're back right after this. Now let's get to some updated results on that critical Oregon House seat down in Marion County that could give Democrats a pivotal supermajority in that chamber. Tonight, Democrat Leslie Munoz leads incumbent Republican Tracy Kramer by 119 votes. That is close. When we last checked in on this race on Monday, Munoz led by just over 100 votes. We likely won't know the actual winner until results are certified, which will happen on December 2nd. Right now, the threshold to trigger an automatic recount is around 41 votes, so Kramer needs a few dozen more votes to go her way to get to that point. If the Democrat Munoz does indeed take the seat, it would give Democrats a 36-24 supermajority in that chamber. They already hold a supermajority in the Senate, 18 seats to 12. If Democrats have that power in both chambers, they could, let me reiterate, could create new taxes or raise current ones without needing to cross the aisle and have Republicans get on board to help out. And that brings us to this viewer email that we got after the show on Monday. Linda wrote to us to say, "Excuse me, but did I hear you say that if the Democrats got a supermajority, they had to increase taxes on certain things?" I got to tell you, we got a couple of comments like that, and I'm not sure if I worded something in an odd way on Monday or what happened there, but that's the false impression that I want to roll back. To answer your question, Linda, no. The Democrats do not have to do anything with taxes if they have a supermajority in both chambers. It just simply means they have the ability to do so without needing any Republican votes. And while we're talking about the legislature in Salem, a familiar face is returning to the Republican side of things, a leadership role for House Republicans. It's Christine Drazen. She'll be the House Minority Leader, taking up a role she previously held before launching her bid for governor that fell short. Drazen's previous tenure in the House from 2019 to 2022 was marked by walkouts, which she often led, and clashes with then House Speaker and current Governor Tina Kotek. That'll be interesting to watch. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. For those of you watching live on TV, the good stuff's coming your way next. And for the rest of you watching online, don't forget, you can stream the story on your own schedule. You can download the free KGW Plus app, available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. Have a great Wednesday night. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.